Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Appreciate you subscribing, tuning in, however you're getting this podcast, wherever you're getting this. Thanks for referring others. Today I want to touch on forgetting. This is something that comes up from time to time when I get out and talk to people about networking. I'm working on a training program with an individual right now and solicited questions and comments from potential participants wanting to know what they wanted to address with respect to networking. One of the things that came up was, hey, how do you remember names? How can you keep track of all these details when you're out there talking to people? And I get that in other settings as well. But it's interesting. I was reading Psychology Today. I don't want to say it's my go-to, but it's one of my favorite magazines out there. And I was looking at the August 2021 issue, and I don't read everything in here. Psychology really kind of runs the gamut, but I do look for things that are relevant to professional relationships. People were having mommy issues. It's not necessarily relevant, but there was an article in here entitled "Let It Go," and I believe the author of the article, it's really kind of an interview article, but the author of the article is Devin Fry. And in the article, Devin is basically interviewing a neurologist by the name of Scott Small. And Scott studies and treats Alzheimer's disease at Columbia University. And he's got a book coming out called Forgetting: The Benefits of Not Remembering. People beat themselves up for not remembering, and I offer up tricks, my sort of tricks, and how do you remember somebody's name? That was something I responded to on LinkedIn and Facebook the other day. I posted something and put a commentary on there, and one of the things that I say about remembering names is when you meet somebody, try and use their name in that conversation. Not all the time, but casually kind of work it in to kind of remind yourself, this is Robert. You're talking to Robert. It's Robert. Because I don't want to forget names either, but this is an interesting article because essentially what this researcher, this neurologist, I'm sure he's got a PhD, what he's saying is that some amount of forgetfulness, it's a big word, forgetfulness, is critical to our minds and our relationships functioning best. And that really kind of, stopped me in my tracks because it's like, oh no, forgetting is a bad thing, but maybe it's not, is what they're saying. Maybe, a small amount of forgetting is not a bad thing. And he talks in here, and there were some questions that were asked and answered. That was the style of the article. But one of the questions was, you argue that nominal, non-pathological forgetting isn't a glitch, but rather an adaptation. Why? And part of the answer was, if our environments were like Groundhog Day, every day we're identical, we would want a perfect memory. But because we live in a noisy, ever-fluctuating world, forgetting details is actually a perfect adaptation. It allows our minds to generalize. And it goes on to kind of talk about this. And if you had a photographic memory, right, you could remember somebody's face and put that face with a name, what would happen if that person showed up, assuming a guy, showed up with a beard? Your photographic memory would fail you because you wouldn't be able to generalize to saying, okay, here's the face and here's this face with how it looks like with the beard. I shouldn't say you wouldn't be able to do it, but we need our minds to be adaptable. And I think we all kind of run into situations where the situation has changed. I might run into somebody I know professionally. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I might run into somebody that I know professionally in my hometown, which is 700 miles away in northern Michigan. The context is different. So I might not remember them, or they might look familiar. I might be totally confused. Or another thing, this happens from time to time. You'll run into somebody at an airport, and you know they look awfully familiar, but you can't quite place it because you've known them from another point in time. And so there is a degree of forgetfulness there, and it's, I think it's what Scott Small is arguing here is that this is just an adaptation, and it's nothing to be concerned about. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's just part of life. It's part of the context. If I'm going out to a local event, a face-to-face event in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm running into Columbus, Ohio people, I generally do a pretty good job of connecting people. Now, if somebody's there that I went to high school with, I might not connect with them. They might not connect with me. My mind might be totally confused, saying, I don't, that face is familiar, I can't quite place the name. All those things are perfectly normal because the way I perceive our brain working is it's going through a series of check marks, okay, 6'2", guy, generally dresses nicely, clean shaven, it must be Dean Curry, or whoever. And that's kind of how our mind works. Now, if I were to run into Dean somewhere else, it would be might be something totally different. So, that's, the first point that they try to make with respect to this is, certainly context. Certainly the other thing to keep in mind, and I've been thinking on this quite a bit. My father is getting up in years, 87, 88 years old. And, memory, he's still there. He's still sharp. He was a high school chemistry teacher. He's got a PhD, reads a ton, still reads a ton. One of the questions I asked him when we were getting together summer of 2021, the 2020 Olympics were on. I know that's confusing. But I asked him, I said, what was the first Olympics you remember watching? Because I remember the first Olympics I remember watching was 1972. I watched it with my dad, and we watched it at the neighbor's house. And I asked him, and so he was all there, and he could kind of delineate, when he first watched the Olympics. He said, 1952, he was at a bowling alley where he worked, Tatovich's. He remembered all of that. But he struggles with newer details. He struggles with my kids' names. He'll ask the question, how's your family? And I will answer him in detail about the various kids and whatnot. And my sister's called me, and she's been somewhat concerned about this. But then I started thinking about it. It's like, okay, here's a man who had 3 kids. My parents got divorced. My dad remarried. Marilyn, his wife, my stepmom, had brought 4 daughters to the relationship. So he went from having 3 kids to 4 daughters, or 3 kids to 7 kids, all marrying, some with multiple marriages, all with kids, some with stepkids. It becomes convoluted real quick. And so in my mind, it's like, wow, can't keep track of my 3 kids. And it's like, no, he went from having a small basketball team to an entire Olympic team, to follow on that theme, and trying to keep track of all that is a lot. And so sometimes our memories let go of those sorts of things and just hangs on to the general things. I have a son, Frank. He's got kids. Those are the general things. That's what I really need to hang on to. And the little details, the fact that my oldest son is down in Miami, Florida, he's not going to hang on to. And we tend to look at people as being forgetful, and that might not be the situation at all. Another interesting question in the article related to forgetting: why are occasional memory lapses good for our social life? Scott Small, the neurologist, answered, "We're developing drugs to protect against memory loss, but many marital therapists have joked that what they want is a forgetfulness drug. Too much memory presents a challenge in any long-term relationship. Resentment, vindictiveness, they all come from not being able to let go of emotional memories. People who ruminate over anger or fear suffer often in loneliness." And so we basically arguing here is, forgetfulness is good. Remembering all the details, certainly remembering somebody's name is important. But again, when you're running out there and you're meeting lots of people, it's kind of hard to keep track of that. But some of the details in the middle, somebody, hey, do you remember this situation? And I might not remember. I might not remember a situation. And that's not necessarily a horrible thing, because my mind is being selective on what it's keeping and what it's not keeping. And it's probably good. It's probably good that, because we all have these little, things in our lives with relationships where we're just off kilter. My wife and I married 27 years at this point, working on 28. There have been things, there have been times, there have been weeks, months, years where we're just not hitting the way, we originally intended. And as time goes on, you start to forget those things. And that's good. And that's good to forget those things. But at the same time, there are probably good things, good details you're going to lose track of as well. And I'm not saying that's good necessarily, but our minds can only hang on to so much. And so what Scott Small is saying here is, forgetting some of the details is okay. It's the general notion that matters. The general notion that this person is in my life, and generally speaking, this person is a good person, and I can rely on them. The fact that there might have been a situation where you were at cross purposes or at odds with one another was just a temporary thing, and so you're gonna tend to forget that. The other question he talks about in here: what can we do to help our brains forget what we need to forget? And essentially, what the response is, Scott Small's response is don't isolate. And he says one of the best ways to make sure that you don't have a brain that's burning too hot with bad memories is to stay socially engaged. PTSD is a disorder of too much memory, and one of the things that most predisposes someone to PTSD after a traumatic event is social isolation. And so, what you need to do, social interaction is good. Social interaction is good, and if you stop and think about it, if you have a bad interaction with somebody, if you don't see anybody else, that's just, as he puts it in here, burning too hot with a bad memory. You're best to have other social interactions to kind of to fill in. It's almost, I guess I think of it, and I'm not a neurologist. I mean, Scott Small might be on here, and he might be totally contradicting me, but I kind of look at it as almost like a computer hard drive. And we save things, but even when we delete them, they're still there. They're there until something overwrites them. And it's kind of the same thing with our memories. It's like okay, it's a detail. I'm going to remember it until I can't remember it anymore, or until something else replaces it. And that something else, hopefully is something better. So the point I want to make in this particular program is that all forgetting is not bad. It's just part of our mind's work, and I'm going to be more forgiving of myself if I don't hang on to names. I'm still going to work to try and keep them, but I recognize that it's not an easy thing. When I when I first basically took over AmSpirit Business Connections all those years ago, and I joke with people, I said, I knew everybody in the organization. I could walk into a room and I knew who everybody was. And now the organization has grown. I'm a little older. It's a lot bigger. And it's harder for me to do that. I walk into a room and I don't necessarily know anybody. And it's just the situation has changed. But as time has gone on, every year I'm meeting more and more new people and trying to hang on to the old. It almost becomes insurmountable at some point in time. I realize to a degree our brains are almost limitless reservoirs of information. We hang on to everything. But while we hang on to everything, it doesn't mean we recall everything. And I was reminded of this because I was when I went back home to Michigan, Houghton, Michigan, to go visit family this summer. There was an iconic sheriff who had passed, and I went to his services and was standing in line to pay my respects, and had a high school friend come up to me. And immediately I remembered it because we rode the bus together and we had a lot of interactions growing up. But there were other people that I saw and somebody had to remind me who they were. And as soon as they reminded me who they were, it was like I was able to access all sorts of information about, okay, I know when they graduated, I know they played hockey, I know they did this, I know they did that. So anyhow, forgetfulness is not always a bad thing. Don't beat yourself up. Do the best you can. I thought this was worthwhile to share. Just to let you know, if you're not familiar, we have a 1-minute daily podcast that comes out. 1 minute is me sharing inspiration, insight, quote a lot of wonderful people, authors, thought leaders that are out there. It's called Networking RX Minute. You can easily go out there and do a search, Networking RX Minute, and find it and subscribe. And again, it's 1 minute a day. Not hard to keep up on. You can binge a bunch and binge a whole week's worth in less than 10 minutes. So if you check that out, I would appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.